Past noon on a quiet Louisiana back road, a local police officer slowed his cruiser when he noticed a lone man jogging along the railroad tracks. The man was dusty and drenched in sweat under the hot sun, wearing nothing more than a tank top and shorts. Just hours earlier, a dangerous prisoner had escaped from a nearby federal prison, so the sight immediately raised the officer's suspicions. He pulled over and stepped out of his car. "Hold up a second," the officer called. The man stopped and caught his breath, but he looked surprisingly calm and relaxed. The officer asked why he was out there. The jogger calmly explained that he was just out for a run and was in town doing construction work on houses damaged by Hurricane Katrina. He even smiled politely. But the officer couldn't ignore the alert fresh in his mind. An escaped inmate was on the loose, described as a white male with a similar height and build. You match the description of that escaped prisoner," the officer said, studying him closely. The jogger didn't panic or flinch. He introduced himself as Robert Jones and added with a light laugh that his friends called him Jimmy. The two different names made the officer uneasy. He radioed dispatch for more information and kept the man talking while they waited. They made small talk. The jogger spoke easily about everyday things, so naturally that the officer began to doubt whether this could really be the dangerous fugitive he was searching for. After about 10 tense minutes, dispatch sent an unclear faxed photo. Unsure and unconvinced, the officer finally decided to let the man go, offering only a warning. "Be careful, buddy." The jogger waved and continued down the tracks at an easy pace. 2 hours later, those same 4 words echoed again and again in the jogger's mind as he slipped through the pine woods north of town. His freedom had depended on a single, casual goodbye. Only later would the officer learn the shocking truth. The man he had just let walk away was Richard Lee McNair, a convicted murderer and master escape artist who had broken out of prison earlier that very day and had calmly talked his way out of being caught. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the beginning, inside the heavily guarded walls of USP Pollock in central Louisiana. Pollock was a maximum security federal prison surrounded by layers of fencing, razor wire, and watchtowers. It was designed to be escape-proof. Since the day it opened, no inmate had ever made it past the perimeter. In 2006, one of its prisoners was 47-year-old Richard Lee McNair. He didn't look like a typical violent criminal. He had once been a U.S. Air Force sergeant and was known by other inmates and staff as polite, intelligent, and friendly. But behind that calm personality was a fierce determination to be free. McNair was serving 2 life sentences, plus 30 more years, for murder and other crimes. He had no intention of dying behind bars. He had already escaped from prison twice before, and now he was quietly planning to do it again. McNair's criminal story began in 1987 in Minot, North Dakota. During a burglary at a grain warehouse office, he was unexpectedly confronted by 2 men. Panicking, McNair opened fire. One man was wounded but survived. The other, a truck driver named Jerry Thies, was killed. McNair, who had been living a double life as both an Air Force serviceman and a serial burglar, was arrested and convicted of murder and attempted murder. The judge made sure he would never walk free, sentencing him to life in prison. But almost immediately, McNair began looking for ways to escape. In 1988, shortly after his arrest, he famously used lip balm to lubricate his hands, slipped out of his handcuffs inside a police station, and jumped from a 3rd-story window. The escape didn't last long. He was caught later the same day, but it revealed how quick-thinking and fearless he was. In 1992, McNair pulled off a much more serious escape. Along with 2 other inmates at the North Dakota State Penitentiary, he crawled through a ventilation duct and made it outside the prison walls. As he dropped into the freezing night air, he thought it might be the easiest escape he would ever make. He was wrong. McNair stayed on the run for 9 months, changing his appearance and moving across the country, until authorities finally captured him in Nebraska. Each escape taught him something new. With every failure, he became more patient, smarter, and more careful. After his second escape, prison officials classified McNair as extremely dangerous. He was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado, the most secure prison in the United States, where escape is considered nearly impossible. Realizing he would never break out of ADX, McNair changed tactics. He stayed quiet, followed the rules, and played the long game. Eventually, he requested a transfer to a standard maximum security prison. In 2005, his request was approved, and he was moved to USP Pollock in Louisiana. To prison officials, Pollock seemed like a safe place for him. To McNair, it was the perfect place to start planning another escape. At Pollock, McNair became a model inmate. He worked hard, avoided trouble, and earned the trust of the staff. He was assigned to the prison's manufacturing program, where inmates repaired old mailbags for the U.S. Postal Service. Every day, he sat in a large workshop near the prison's outer fence, sewing canvas mail sacks. But while his hands worked, his mind was always observing. He noticed that stacks of repaired mailbags were wrapped in plastic, loaded onto pallets, and moved by forklift to a warehouse outside the main prison fence, where they waited to be picked up. In that routine process, McNair saw opportunity. If he could hide himself among those mailbags, he might be able to ship himself right out of the prison. It was a terrifyingly dangerous idea, but also an irresistible one. Over the next several months, McNair carefully prepared. He studied the timing of the mailbag transfers, the behavior of guards, and the routines of factory workers. Without raising suspicion, he collected scraps and packaging materials. Bit by bit, right under everyone's noses, he secretly built a narrow hiding space inside a stack of mailbags. The plan was taking shape, and McNair was getting closer to freedom once again. Essentially, he prepared one pallet so it had an empty space inside, just big enough for him to curl his body into. He lined the space with cloth to silence any movement, and carefully reinforced it so it would not collapse when more mailbags were stacked on top. To keep from suffocating once the pallet was tightly wrapped in plastic, McNair made a simple breathing tube. It was a thin piece of plastic tubing that he ran up through the layers of bags and shrink wrap so fresh air could reach him. He also hid a razor blade and a basic homemade cutting tool on his body so he could slice through the plastic from the inside when the moment came. Along with that, he secretly saved civilian clothes to help him blend in outside the prison: gym shorts, a t-shirt, and running shoes to replace his prison uniform. He planned everything carefully. As far as he could control it, nothing was left to chance. By early April 2006, McNair was ready. He waited for a day when everything felt normal, with no unusual activity to draw attention. On the morning of April 5, 2006, he reported to the mailbag workshop like any other day and spent hours calmly repairing bags, all while watching the clock and keeping an eye on the pallet he had prepared. Late in the morning, as lunchtime approached, his chance arrived. Guards and inmate crews slowly left the work area for the midday meal, and supervision eased for just a brief moment. McNair volunteered to finish a stack of mailbags, staying behind while everyone else walked out. The second he was alone, he acted fast. He removed his prison uniform, revealing the shorts and tank top he was already wearing underneath, and hid the uniform out of sight. He climbed onto the pallet and twisted his body into the narrow hollow he had created among the mailbags. Curled tightly in a fetal position, he could barely move or breathe without disturbing the bags around him. The air smelled of old canvas and machine oil. The shrink wrap pressed coldly against his face. He quickly pulled more mailbags over the opening above him, burying himself completely. In the dim space, he found the end of the breathing tube and placed it in his mouth. Sweat ran down his face as he forced himself to stay perfectly still and silent. Now all he could do was wait. Just minutes later, right on schedule, a forklift entered the workshop to remove the pallet of repaired mailbags. "Another load for the warehouse. Boring day," the driver muttered. The forklift lifted McNair's pallet, now tightly wrapped in plastic with him hidden inside, and carried it out of the building. McNair felt the jolt as it was raised, and then the strange motion as it moved forward. Through a tiny gap between the mailbags, he caught a thin slice of daylight as the forklift passed through the security gate and delivered the pallet to the external warehouse. At that moment, he was officially outside the prison's main fence, something no inmate had ever done at Pollock. But he was not safe yet. He stayed curled up and motionless while warehouse workers moved nearby. Every second felt endless as his heart pounded. If anyone noticed a sound, a shift, or even a strange bulge in the plastic, everything would end. McNair waited until the workers stepped away, likely heading to lunch, and the area grew quiet. Feeling that he was alone, he decided it was time. Using the razor blade he had hidden, he carefully cut a slit in the plastic from the inside. He worked quickly and silently. He slipped out of the pallet and onto the warehouse floor, blinking under the light. No one was there. He took a deep breath of fresh air and searched for a way out. Seeing the open loading bay door, he moved fast. He crept out of the warehouse into the open yard. Not far away was an unfenced area leading to woods and open fields beyond the prison. His heart racing, McNair jogged away from the building and kept going until the prison was far behind him. It was a powerful moment. He had done the impossible. Richard McNair was free, standing under the open sky for the first time in years. But he knew time was against him. He hoped it would take several hours before anyone realized he was gone, maybe not until the next head count. That hope didn't last long. A warehouse worker soon noticed a pallet with cut plastic and scattered mailbags. Within an hour of McNair's escape, sirens were sounding at USP Pollock. Guards rushed through an emergency count and confirmed that one prisoner was missing. The idea that an inmate could literally mail himself out of a maximum security prison in broad daylight was almost impossible to believe. A massive manhunt began immediately around the prison and nearby roads. By then, McNair had already put several miles between himself and the facility, traveling on foot. He moved through woods and across open fields, avoiding major highways. Still dressed like a jogger, he tried to look harmless whenever a vehicle passed. Eventually, he reached a rural road and followed it toward the town of Ball, Louisiana. He headed north, trying to get as far from Pollock as he could. That was when Officer Carl Bordelon spotted him and stopped to question him, the encounter from the beginning of this story. Amazingly, McNair's calm words during those few critical minutes convinced the officer to let him go. Once out of sight, McNair slipped back into the woods, likely stunned by his own luck. Officer Bordelon later admitted he was shocked and deeply embarrassed when he learned that the friendly jogger he had released was the escaped fugitive everyone was hunting. With that close call behind him, McNair focused even harder on disappearing. He knew that by nightfall, law enforcement across the country would be alerted. The U.S. Marshals Service moved quickly, and within days McNair was placed on their top 15 most wanted fugitives list. His face appeared on America's Most Wanted, and news outlets spread the unbelievable story of the prisoner who mailed himself out of jail. McNair knew he had to vanish immediately. Over the following weeks, he traveled across the country. At some point, he obtained a car, likely stolen. In late April, something remarkable happened. McNair surfaced more than 2,000 miles away in British Columbia, Canada. He had crossed the U.S.-Canada border, possibly using back roads or rural crossings on foot, and ended up in Western Canada. On April 28, 2006, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police approached a suspicious vehicle in a beach parking lot in Penticton, British Columbia. The car was stolen. As two officers went to investigate, McNair, who was nearby, realized he was about to be trapped. "Stop! Police!" one officer shouted. In a split second, McNair ran. He sprinted across a field and vanished before the shocked officers could respond. They recovered the car and found it filled with maps, fake identification, and even a digital camera containing selfies of McNair wearing different disguises. 2 days later, one officer, watching America's Most Wanted, recognized him. McNair had been right there, under their noses, and had escaped again just in time. After that incident, McNair changed his approach. He abandoned any vehicle that could link back to him and began traveling more carefully. For more than a year, he moved back and forth across North America, constantly changing direction to confuse investigators. At one point, he rode a stolen bicycle from British Columbia into the Yukon, then later traveled south again. He briefly re-entered the United States, then crossed back into Canada through remote regions. For long stretches, he disappeared into the vast forests of central Canada, living on the edge of capture yet again. He was even said to be thinking about buying a piece of remote land in British Columbia to hide himself away. Most of the time, he lived in cheap motels under fake names, and sometimes he slept outdoors, camping alone in the wilderness. During this period, McNair closely watched television reports about the hunt for him. He carefully noted what police seemed to know and adjusted his behavior and appearance to stay ahead. He grew a beard, then shaved it off. Sometimes he wore glasses to change how he looked. He relied on his intelligence to stay one step ahead of the authorities and made sure not to draw attention by committing violent crimes. Even though he was a convicted killer on the run, McNair did not hurt anyone during his escape. He stole cars and license plates, and occasionally broke into empty cabins or businesses to get food or supplies, but he avoided direct confrontations. On summer nights, mosquitoes attacked every bit of exposed skin, yet he preferred their bites over the sound of prison doors slamming shut. This strangely restrained behavior earned him a kind of folk hero reputation in the media. The clever convict who mailed himself out of prison and stayed free without spilling blood. By 2007, McNair had traveled thousands of miles. He spent time enjoying the freedom he had missed for so many years, hiking and even mountain biking through the beautiful landscapes of Canada. But he could never truly relax. Paranoia followed him everywhere. Once, at a ranger station in the Yukon, a friendly ranger offered him a cup of coffee. Behind the ranger, a wanted poster with McNair's own face hung on a corkboard. McNair smiled, thanked the man, and quietly left before the connection could be made. Every stranger's glance felt dangerous, and people did recognize him from time to time. After his case appeared on television, tips from Canadian citizens reached the police, keeping the Royal Canadian Mounted Police alert. McNair began moving east, possibly planning to leave North America altogether. In the fall of 2007, he traveled through Canada's Atlantic provinces, including New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. He may have been thinking about boarding a ship or slipping back into the United States through Maine. But the luck that had protected him for so long finally ran out in late October 2007. On October 25, 2007, about a year and a half after his remarkable escape, Richard McNair was driving another stolen vehicle through rural New Brunswick. Without his knowledge, local police had set up a random checkpoint on the road, possibly for routine inspections. When McNair reached the checkpoint, officers asked for identification. The name on his ID did not match their records, and something about his behavior felt off. One officer thought he looked familiar. They took him in for fingerprinting, and just like that, McNair's long journey ended quietly. The fingerprints confirmed his identity. They had finally caught the fugitive the U.S. Marshals had been chasing. After his arrest, McNair was reportedly cooperative. After living so long on alert, fueled by adrenaline and constant caution, part of him may have felt relief that it was finally over. Authorities were certainly relieved. A senior U.S. Marshal involved in the search later admitted he had developed a professional respect for McNair's intelligence and persistence. Years later, the Marshal and McNair even exchanged letters. McNair expressed admiration for the manhunt, while the Marshal expressed amazement at McNair's skill at escaping. Back in the United States, Richard Lee McNair faced the consequences. Prison officials were embarrassed by how he had escaped and were determined he would never do it again. McNair was returned to the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, the one place he was unlikely to ever escape from. He remains there today, locked in a small solitary cell for 23 hours a day, surrounded by some of the most notorious criminals in the country. Now in his mid-60s, McNair will spend the rest of his life in custody unless something truly unimaginable happens. If I had buckled my seatbelt that day, I'd be in Mexico right now, McNair later joked, referring to the small traffic issue that led to his capture. But in truth, his arrest was inevitable. Even McNair admits that no one can outrun fate forever. His incredible story has turned him into a legend among prisoners and prison historians. He is the only known inmate to escape from a jail, a state prison, and a federal prison. 3 successful escapes in one lifetime. Today, inside ADX Florence, he walks back and forth in his cell, counting 23 steps from wall to door and 23 steps back again. He keeps counting because a man who once mailed himself to freedom has never fully stopped believing that lightning might strike one more time.